What's going on? Raven Ritual 666 back from the dead with some more Diablo 4 content. Today we're going to be going over my updated Frost Lord Sorcerer build, or as I like to call, the Lucky Crit Sorcerer build. So let's start off with skill points, and then we will look over some of the gear, and then finally the Paragon board. So, early game while leveling, I went Frostbolt and over to Glinting Frostbolt to regen mana. You kind of need that until you start getting into the Torment mode, where you've got enough mana regen, or enough lucky hit chance, that you no longer need to equip a basic skill. So to begin with, we're going to go 2 points into Firebolt. Only because we need to get to the next tree, as well as we are going to use Firebolt as an enchantment to make sure we're getting damage reduction and extra damage. Next, we want to put 5 points into Ice Shards, 1 point into Enhanced Ice Shards, and 1 point into Destructive Ice Shards. That is going to allow a lot of vulnerable and be able to mean we can keep up consistently doing damage. So next, we're going to pick up every... I'd probably go Frost Nova first, if you're still leveling. Just 4 points we're going to put into Frost Nova, and then 1 into Enhanced Frost Nova, and 1 into Mystical Frost Nova. It's the way we're going to provide crowd control with Frozen, as well as Vulnerable, and it's going to work very well with our Ice Shards enchantment. So, if you don't know, Ice Shards will automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. So, the purpose of the build is to continue applying Frozen, Vulnerable, and then crit damage. Next, just 1 point into Flame Shield, 1 point into Enhanced Flame Shield, which grants you movement speed. It's good for speed running as well. And then 1 point into Flame Shield heals you. It's a nice snap button when you need a little bit of life in a pinch, but it's also good if you're running with lower level friends, just to like speed run through the dungeons. 1 point into Teleport, which is very important. Enhanced Teleport, and then Shimmering Teleport, because you actually get 30% damage reduction, which is very nice. I've messed around with Elemental Attunement. I did run in my last build guide with 3 points, but I've changed it just to 1 point. I think I'm still getting enough lucky hit chances to reset your defensive skills. 1 point into Ice Armor, 1 point into Enhanced Ice Armor, and 1 point into damage against vulnerable enemies contributes to 50% more Ice Armor's barrier. I really like it. Some people don't run the 2 capstones on it, however, I really like to increase my barrier. Alright, so again, this is going to be a 4 defensive skill build, because we really need that to stay alive, because we are a squishy little Sorc. We're going to go 3 points into Precision Magic. We want to increase our lucky hit chance as much as possible. It is a lucky hit build with crit damage, aka a lucky crit. 1 point into Align the Elements. We don't really need that, it's a throwaway point. But we want 3 points into Protection. Every time we use a cooldown, we get 30% of max life as a barrier. When we are playing, we want to try to rotate our defensive skills. So we do Frost Over. Wait 2 seconds. 1, 2. Then we want to hit Ice Armor, which will last up for 6 seconds, because Ice Armor is a really good defensive skill. Once that's down, and we see our barrier drop from our health bar, hit Flame Shield. By then, you can Frost Nova again, and you can teleport back in. So if we keep rotating our defensive skills, you're going to keep up a barrier, which is going to make you almost invulnerable. I have put 2 points into Mana Shield. I wasn't currently running this. So I have heard when you are keeping up your lucky hits and keeping the infinite mana, which we are starting to do for endgame, that you're not really spending 100 mana. However, I do see it come up on my bar a lot of the time that Mana Shield is active, Mana Shield is active. And now it lasts for 5 seconds, so 10% damage reduction is still nice to have, especially when we're starting to push higher Nightmare tiers. So I do think it is worth it. However, I have been messing with these 2 points into Elemental Attunement, and I've been messing with taking out points from Snap Freeze as well. So the most important part of this build and what we are doing now is making sure we're picking up Inner Flames and 3 points into Devouring Blaze. So you deal 60% increased critical strike damage against burning enemies. If they are also immobilized, this bonus is 150%. Now that is insane, the amount of damage we can do. I've seen this build hit an Ice Shard for 1 million damage, which is just crazy. So we'll talk about the gear and how all those things synergize later that we can do it. But Devouring Blaze is important, and you want to be looking for an amulet with 3 points of Devouring Blaze onto it to make sure that you can get those massive damage buffs. Now, most people won't run Snap Freeze or Icy Veil. I think 1 point to Icy Veil is worthwhile. 3 points in a Snap Freeze is very viable, because when we don't have Frost Nova up all the time, just hitting Ice Shards, lucky hit proc more often, you can freeze enemies, the Ice Shard enchantments are going to home in, kill them, explode them, and you're going to get a little bit of value, plus the tiny bit of survivability by having it. But you do not have to run these points. If you need more lucky hit chance on your defensive skills, feel free to go Elemental Attunement. You could even go into Glass Cannon if you want more damage. You can, if you're short, if you don't have over 100 mana and you're still early working towards this build, you can put 3 points into Devastation to make sure your max mana is up to 9 more to push you over 100. Elemental Dominance is also quite nice to have, but for me at this stage, I am rocking that. We're going to pick up Deep Freeze. Deep Freeze is a great snap button. You know, if I'm out of all my cooldowns and I'm about to die, I can hit the button, I can take a couple of potions, because I've got like 4 seconds. I use Deep Freeze sometimes for a joke. Like, I'll press it, have a drink of water, go back to fighting. I'll take it to take a potion, but we want to go Prime Deep Freeze. We want the barrier when Deep Freeze ends, and Supreme Deep Freeze, because this is why I like Deep Freeze, right? It reduces 50% of your cooldown. So I'm going to rotate all my defensive skills, all of my abilities, and when there's nothing left, I'm just going to go and Deep Freeze for 4 seconds, come out with a barrier, and then I can proc my defensive skills to get my damage and my buffs back up. Now, all of these are fantastic. Permafrost, 15% damage to elites, fantastic. Hoarfrost, 9% to chilled enemies, but 18% more damage to frozen enemies, fantastic. Frigid Breeze, vulnerable damage, has a chance to generate 15 mana. That's fantastic. Really good lucky hit proc, which helps us keep up infinite mana. And Icy Touch, more damage with cold to vulnerable enemies, which is awesome. So the key passive, we're using Avalanche. This is where the whole build starts to synergize. Lucky hit. Your frost skills have up to a 10% chance to make your next cast of Ice Shards, which is what we're using, consume no mana until 40% increased damage. The chances doubled against vulnerable enemies, leading to massive stacks of damage, and you are going to see that proc so much. So that is the skills. Let's have a look at our gear. Okay, so on our helmet, these 4 affixes are really important. Firstly, you want maximum life, cooldown reduction. Cooldown reduction is probably the most important one. Maximum mana, and then life on kill. These are still not my highest rolls, but it's the only helmet I have with all 4 of them. Fantastic. We are going to need a second charge of Frost Nova. That's going to allow us to keep up our damage really quickly, as well as our barriers with our defensive skills. Because every time we use a cooldown, we get a barrier. Every time we kill a frozen enemy, we're going to get barriers. And I'll talk about that in Paragon. I have finally swapped to Raiment of the Infinite. I was trying to make this build work without using the meta chest piece. But if you do not get the Raiment of the Infinite, you ideally could use the Iceheart Braze pants for the interim, and then just make damage reduction chest piece. But ideally, this is very important, because after you teleport, you're going to pull enemies in. It's going to apply stunned, which is a very important damage number in our equation. And then we can hit Frost Nova, freeze them all, and then we're going to be able to apply Immobilize through our gloves. So the reason why we're doing this is this aspect here. You deal 34% more damage to Immobilize, stunned, or frozen enemies. What a lot of people aren't aware of, this actually stacks. It's not just 34% to either or. It's 34% to Immobilize, 34% to stunned, 34% to frozen. Now that's almost 100% damage. That is a lot. So ideally, what we're trying to do is work out how we can get frozen, stunned, and immobilized. And that is what we're doing through our abilities, as well through our skill tree. And that's why we want Devouring Blaze. because we want to try and get Immobilize to get the 150% crit damage. So to do that, to get Immobilize, right? Well, to get stunned, firstly, this chest piece on the Ice Shard build is the only way we're going to be able to get stunned. We're not using any lightning abilities. We're not using Arc Flash. We're not applying stun. So this chest piece allows us to teleport in and apply stun for 2.7 seconds, which means we're getting that 34% damage. There are 3 ways that you can apply Immobilize that I found so far with Sorcerer. So one is you could take off Deep Freeze, our old snap button, and you can put Meteor. Meteor, because Meteor's impact immobilizes enemies for 2 seconds. This is what most people do more consistently to do damage. I play on controller, and I find Meteor doesn't quite hit the way I want it to a lot of the time. So for me, it just feels a little bit clunky. You know, you gotta cast Meteor, you gotta teleport, you gotta Deep Freeze, all in quick succession. And if the Meteor misses, you've just kind of wasted all that uptime and damage. Now, if you want to still be able to apply Immobilize, but very easily, is Fist of Fate. So, Fist of Fate. It has a lucky hit up to 24% chance to Immobilize. It also applies Daze, which is a crowd control. Now, Fist of Fate are no good unless you have the aspect that does about 240 or 250% more of their normal damage. The reason being, they're RNG globs. So, one attack could do 1% of its normal damage, but it could also do 250%. Since it's over 200%, we are getting more damage than regular on a more consistent basis, because we have 150% more chance. So, it's kind of a lucky hit build, and that's why I call it my lucky crit build. Pants are just for survivability. You want damage reduction from distant enemies, damage reduction from burning enemies, damage reduction from close, and ideally max life. However, I got a good roll on damage reduction, so how about DR pants? Now the boots, I'm rocking Isu's Heirloom. The reason being is that I've got so much movement speed, it's very nice for moving around through dungeons. But the aspect, your crit chance is increased by 21% of my movement speed bonus. Now, my movement speed at the moment is 127%. So if you put 0.21 times by 1.27, I'm sitting around like a 26% crit chance, which means I don't need to put crit chance as much on both of my rings. So to make sure we're doing consistently high crit damage, because with Devouring Blaze, our goal is to do as much crit damage as possible, because 60% crit damage to burning enemies, 150% to immobilized. Same as any build. Right now, we want to make sure we've got as much vulnerable damage as possible, as much crit damage as possible, and we want to make sure we can keep our mana over 100. So this aspect, core or mastery skills, so that's, for example, Blizzard builds as well, or Ice Shard builds, cast at or above 100 mana, gain 57% crit chance. Now that doesn't apply to your flat number here, neither does the aspect from our boots, Isu's Heirloom. But if you work out 27% plus 26% plus 57%, I'm at 99% crit chance. Ideally, I want to find that 1% more so I can consistently crit. Consistently critting means I'm getting those overpower crits, and when I've applied stunned, immobilized, and frozen, that's how I'm hitting those big buku damage numbers for almost and over 1 million when the stars align. So rings, amulets, what are you looking for? Well, firstly, you need to have 3 ranks of Devouring Blaze. Or on a rare, 2 ranks, and you level up to 3. That is super, super important. The other affixes you can roll around it. Secondly, you want 3 ranks of all defensive skills. Thirdly, which I don't actually have right now, is cooldown reduction. I think cooldown reduction is probably more important than either lucky hit chance with a barrier or mana cost reduction. I'd probably take out the mana cost reduction for cooldown reduction. It's going to help me keep up my defensive skills and damage up more consistently, but I guess that's still the piece that I'm looking for. Otherwise, if you don't have cooldown reduction, mana cost reduction, lucky hit chance with a barrier. So I changed to a weaker ring, and I'll come back to that one in a sec, but on our ring, we want to have vulnerable damage, crit damage. Those are the most 2 important. Thirdly, lucky hit chance now. I did have max mana and resource cost reduction, but I don't need it as much now because the more lucky hit chance I have, the more avalanche the key passive is going to proc, which means I'm getting more free hits, more damage, and more consistent. Now, the more lucky hit chance I have, the more chance I have to apply Immobilize. Every time I'm applying Immobilize, I'm getting 150% crit damage, which is just amazing. So, we want lucky hit chance. So, crit damage, vulnerable damage, lucky hit chance on both our rings. For the fourth, I'm at 99% crit chance. So, ideally, I'd love to find that one affix that gives me 7.3% crit chance, because that's going to push me over 100, which means I can always crit because of this aspect. But if not, damage to frozen is quite nice to have. Maximum mana is really good to have, or maximum life. If you're struggling with survivability and your life isn't that high, go max life. If you don't have enough maximum mana yet because you're still leveling up to try and get this build right, and you don't have over 100 mana, I would put max mana on one of those rings as the fourth affix. You kind of get to this point once you reach level 90s that you can swap out damage for resource gen, or you could swap out resource gen for more damage, or you don't have enough lucky hit chance, so you're spending too much mana, so you need to put those points into maximum mana. And for me, I feel like I'm at that really good spot in balance at the moment with this setup. But I will change this ring out for better. I like the aspect using a cooldown restores mana, just for when it does go down. It's very nice to be able to pop a couple defensive skills, get back over 100 mana, and continue to do damage. But I had my max mana up to 222. So with 222, ideally I wouldn't need that. Using a cooldown restores 19 mana. I could put on an aspect to do 25% more damage. Increase my attack speed by 25%. That would be ideal. But right now I've got the balance. We do want the Avalanche key passive now applies to one additional cast. That's an extra free lucky hit with buku damage. We really want that. Now looking at our weapons. So you want a high item power weapon to get as much damage as possible. Now we are going to imprint the ice shards, pierce additional times and deals less damage per hit because they chain, they do a lot of damage, they apply vulnerable, and we want to put emeralds into it to increase crit damage to vulnerable enemies. Very important. Now for your offhand, there are a few different things that are really good to have. Ideally, I say cooldown reduction is super important because we don't have cooldown reduction on Amulet. I would love it on there and my offhand. But lucky hit chance to restore primary resource is very nice, and lucky hit chance while you have a barrier is awesome. So I'm very happy with the roll of that. Now you must have the aspect dealing 34% more damage to immobilize, stunned, or frozen enemies. That aspect, this aspect to get increased crit chance when your core or mastery skills are cast over 100 mana are so important to the damage multiplier on this build. I can't stress that enough. If you do not have those two aspects, it's not going to work efficiently. So let's have a look at our Paragon board. So starting at the first board. Ideally, you're going to want to go up to the right to non-physical damage and max life, and then come up through to pick up this crit chance, the dexterity node, and pick up your glyph socket. I've came back for the extra maximum life here, because I needed that for higher torment tiers. I am probably going to mess up by taking these points out and utilizing them elsewhere, but for now, just your goal is to pick up the glyph socket, pick up the dexterity nodes, and get to the next board if you're leveling. Non-physical damage over resistance to all elements, because resistance to all elements is currently bugged. So you don't actually need that node, but I do like the will powers here. But I'll probably mess with taking those 3 points out. First board, you want to go into the board that has Frigid Fate. I go out and pick up Oppressive because of the vulnerable damage. It's very nice to have. And I come up to pick up the glyph socket. I'm using Tactician at the moment to increase the vulnerable damage off of this node, because there's two nodes, rare nodes in range, which is very nice to have for increased vulnerable damage. I am going to mess with a couple of the glyph sockets in here. But once you've probably got that glyph socket, I think the most important thing that's going to help you stay alive is picking up the second board for Icefall and just getting the legendary node. Killing a frozen enemy grants you 15% of your maximum life as a barrier. Now, every time we use a defensive skill, right, and we're putting on a cooldown, we are getting a free barrier. So, defensive skill, barrier for 2 seconds. Killing an enemy frozen, barrier. Defensive skill, barrier. Killing an enemy that's frozen, barrier. So it is very, very important to get this node. I was dying a lot until I picked that node up. And once I picked that node up, all of a sudden my survivability just went through the roof. So I just went and applied cold damage, chill application. We're not really applying chilled. Ice Shards doesn't apply chilled. So we don't need to pick up any of these other rare nodes throughout this board. Ideally, you could come to this board last if you wanted to utilize picking up other rare nodes. But if you're leveling still, I recommend picking up Icefall. You also want to pick up Frigid Fate. Dealing cold damage to vulnerable enemies increases your lucky hit chance up to 15%. A lot more lucky hit chance means more infinite mana, more Immobilize, more days, more damage. After that, I did pick up a node here for lucky hit chance here because it's a lucky crit build, so why not? Coming to this board, I used Destruction as a glyph node into this board after picking up Burning Instinct. The reason being, there's a lot of these little nodes where we can increase damage to elites and increase damage to burning enemies. Very nice to have. Now, Destruction is better in this slot on the board because there's more dexterity and range. 44 out of 25, which means we are getting 87% crit damage with core skills. But until you get there, if you're leveling, put Destruction in your first slot. You're going to get more value out of Destruction early on. We come across into this board to pick up the mana. Because we're not putting skill points into the increased mana, it's very cheap to come up here and pick up extra mana and extra life. Very nice to have in the Elemental Summoner board. And then just to the Glyph socket, and we're putting in Control, which is very nice for crowd control enemies. And we get 20% increased damage to stunned or frozen enemies. Extra damage, very nice. Finally, we're going to come out and go into Enchantment Master. Like, I did test using the legendary node, was great, but the extra glyph socket is very nice to have. So we're using Flame Feeder. So very dexterity in range, you're getting 9.9% damage to burning targets. To finish off, I'm going to come around and once I hit level 100, put into the rare node Ruinous to do non-physical damage, more damage to elites, and pick up a few of these nodes. But alright, let's have a little bit of a look at some gameplay. Because why not? So you see Flame Shield here, we've got that movement speed. Very nice to have while running through empty space. Isu's Heirloom keeps us nice and quick. You want to teleport in, stun, and you're going to hit some huge numbers. Crossing over again. So the goal is find some enemies, rip them up, and you want to teleport right in. Poke crossed over, pull up barrier. You can off-screen a lot of enemies. And look at those chains of destruction.
It's locked.
So this is the build, guys, and worst case scenario, if you run out of these abilities, like I'm just gonna pop crossovers for the sake of it, right? I'm gonna pop all my defensive skills. Uh-oh, I pressed too many of them. What can I do? Oh, I can hit my ultimate button. I can survive the block blister, and then I've got my cooldowns back. So now I can go, oh cool, I can teleport again. Ready? Teleport's gonna pull them in, apply stun, crossed over. And then I just want to rotate all my defensive skills. Alright guys, that is the build. I just want to say thank you so much. I hope I see you all in the next video, guys. This is my Diablo. Level 98. Frost Lord. Sorcerer. Raven Ritual 666. See you all next time.